Hey guys, this video I want to look at environmental policies as a way of the government targeting our aggregate supply potential. So before we look into how environmental policies can actually improve our aggregate supply potential in the long run, we're going to look at what the problems that exist in the environment are at the moment. So environmental policies try to mitigate or lower the influence of global warming, climate change, prolonged droughts, rising sea levels, and I could go on. So these are just but a few examples of how the climate or how our environment is rapidly changing. So these are in fact negative externalities of consumption or production. So we talked about negative externalities being an on-cost of production or consumption that a third party has to bear, and that third party is not part of the initial transaction. So to look at a working example of that, say we're driving a car. We need fuel to power the car or to drive the car. And as a result of burning fuel, we release the carbon emissions. And carbon emissions contribute to global warming and climate change. And because of these higher CO2 emissions, this would actually cause a greenhouse effect to the environment, which keeps the heat in, causing global warming as well as climate change. Now, of course, there have been many debates about whether global warming is actually happening, whether it is man-made or whether it is natural. For the purposes of this course, just assume that global warming is happening. You can argue as much as you want in other science-related areas, science studies, in maths perhaps, in English. But for economics, we're just going to assume that these environmental policies target global warming and that they are actually making a difference. So just to keep economists happy and to keep your teachers happy, global warming and climate change here are in fact happening. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to move on to how environmental policies can improve our aggregate supply potential. Now, to break down aggregate supply yet again, we have aggregate supply as being a component of both primary factors of production. So primary factors of production are components of aggregate supply. So primary and secondary factors contribute to our aggregate supply. Now, as we all know, primary factors are land, labor, and capital. And our secondary factor is just purely the efficiency to which we utilize our land, labor, and capital. And although land may be misleading to the extent that we may just automatically think that it's just land, as in grass fields and all that, but in fact land relates to all natural resources. Just a little bit simpler to just call it land for economists. All natural resources. So obviously we can see that environmental policies don't actually target our labor supply, nor does it target our capital supply, nor does it target efficiency, but primarily it targets our natural resources. And this focuses on the idea of intertemporal efficiency, so that we keep our future generations' prosperity alive, and we don't over consume the natural or the non-renewable natural resources that we have available at this time, and that we preserve something for the benefit or for the economic prosperity of future generations. So in these the series of videos on environmental policy and how they can affect 5 government economic goals and our living standards, we're going to look at what is known as this emissions trading scheme. This is basically a cap and trade system. And we're going to talk about this in a much more thorough analysis in our lecture on emissions trading scheme, but we're just going to, for this video, going to look at how this has evolved from, firstly, a carbon pollution reduction scheme to a carbon tax in 12-13, so this is 2010, and then finally in 14 and 15 and onwards, a emissions trading scheme, or an ETS. So how does environmental policies improve our aggregate supply? Well, firstly, it improves our natural resources. It means that we are able to sustain our level of economic growth to the future. So what this means is, say, for example, oil. At the moment, we have a finite amount of oil that we can use. If we burn all the oil, then it takes millions of years to regenerate, for the earth to compress the oil underneath the ground, and for nature to actually form oil again. So once we use it, it's basically, in our short time frame, we can't use it again. So what environmental policies target is they target this preservation of all our non-renewable land resources. And so what this does is that it helps improve our environmental conditions. So take, for example, global warming and climate change. These are issues, or these environmental issues, actually deplete our natural resources. So take, for example, climate change. They cause a rise in sea levels, and therefore a lot of arable land nearby the coast would therefore be covered by sea. The ice caps will start to melt. Our ecosystems will start to degrade, and it kind of messes up, or it's not very beneficial, or messes up the ecological sustainability of our world. So as a result, we have fewer land resources or natural resources at our disposal to produce goods and services. So we need land, or arable land, to make crops, or to harvest crops. If we don't have this arable land, if they're slowly covered by water or destroyed by floods, droughts, and all that, we don't have the primary factors needed to make, say, wheat, barley, rice, and they're the staples of making bread and all these other sorts of goods and services, or particularly goods that we use on a day-to-day basis. So when our land resources improve, when we try to mitigate this issue of climate change, I'm just going to put a big red cross across climate change, then this would actually help us increase land resources. And what this means is we have more arable land, less volatile climatic conditions, and which all lead to larger harvests and equally greater potential to produce goods. So land resources are very important in contributing to aggregate supply, because without land resources, without our natural resources, our labor, capital, and however efficient we are in utilizing our labor and capital become very much useless. So environmental policies are there, or designed to improve our land resources, to maintain our land resources or our natural resources, in order to increase or maintain a sustainable rate of economic growth to the future. And we're going to go through in further lectures how environmental policies, especially the emissions trading scheme, can help achieve the 5 economic goals and help maximize our living standards.